but with life-threatening injuries. Dr.
All right, good evening, YouTube. I am Mrs. Dave the Lawyer, aka Jacqueline Leah. And yesterday, after we finished up the hearing about the whistleblower that came forward about COVID cover-ups, we got into another hearing about other COVID cover-ups. This was actually the original hearing of this year that Senator Ron Johnson spoke about the massive amount of COVID cover-ups that he's uncovered over the years. So let's get started with that. I think we only have about an hour left of that hearing, maybe a little bit less, but I do have another hearing geared up to go when we're finished with this, and I think it'll be really interesting. So let's get started. Happy Sunday night. Thanks for joining me. I'm not watching House of the Dragon right now to be on this stream. But let's get going.
Blonsky, how do you answer that?
Several years ago, Dr. Brian Hooker and I did an analysis of VAERS when we tried to pinpoint when enough VAERS reports had existed to identify myocarditis. And that dates all the way back to the week of February 19th of 2021, which is well before even Israel contacts the CDC saying, we're seeing a whole lot of myocarditis. We want to speak with a relevant expert at CDC. It is way before anyone in the United States that the CDC admitted to them on May 28th.
Okay. They didn't start the clock right away, so I'll yield to my ranking member now.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would like to enter into the record a 2024 study from FDA and CMS, which concluded that there was, quote, no statistically significant association between either mRNA vaccine and stroke. I'd also like to enter into the record a letter from the American Heart Association stating that there is a, quote, substantially elevated risk of stroke from COVID-19 infection, if there's no objection, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
There's no clear, let alone convincing evidence that COVID-19 vaccines have caused adverse effects beyond the rare ones that public.
This is a lie. Like, I don't understand how the left is so good at just blatantly lying. Senator Johnson provided so much evidence to prove that many people, a significant amount of people, suffered vaccine injuries. He just cited a study that was done with people that were only diagnosed with a vaccine-related injury. And then this senator has the nerve to come on and say, well, that's not proven. It's just not true.
Public health officials have acknowledged there is clear evidence that COVID-19 itself is linked with many worse adverse events, including stroke. And there are signs that the administration is regretting its implied or explicit opposition to the use of vaccines in America today because they are so contrary to what.
If anybody has some free time right now, I would just love to know like how much money any big pharma company has donated to Senator Blumenthal. I think that'd be really interesting. Maybe Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson. What was the other one? Moderna. I would just be interested how much money they've donated to his campaign fund.
People across the country really believe, and correctly believe, that vaccines actually do save lives. I'd like to ask Ms. Young a couple of questions, but first I want to thank you again. Obviously, this moment is a very, very difficult one for you, as it would be for anyone recalling almost 70 days in a coma, 200 plus days in a hospital, in intensive care, near death. At the time you entered the hospital, there were no vaccines available. By the time you finished life support, there were multiple vaccines, and millions of people had been inoculated. And so, in a sense, your story is about re-entering the world, a different world, a better world that would have saved you from this horrific ordeal.
That's another lie, because we have no idea if the vaccine would have prevented what happened to this woman. First of all, we know for a fact that the COVID-19 vaccine did not prevent people from getting COVID. We know that to be true. There were plenty of people, and you guys probably know a lot of people that got the vaccine and still ended up getting COVID. They can tell you all they want, well, because they got this vaccine that the symptoms were not as bad, but they really don't know that. They have no idea. So that's just not true.
But this basic truth, this miraculous outcome during the time that you were unconscious, became tarnished when opportunists began raising false alarms and warned of hidden harms from vaccines while hawking.
Okay, this is where this is going to drive me crazy. Okay, what would be the purpose? Like, what would be the motivation for somebody to bring about the fact that people were having adverse events from the vaccine? How would that help anybody? How would that benefit anybody? It wouldn't necessarily benefit anybody. It would just bring to light that maybe the vaccine is unsafe, or try to help people that haven't taken it to understand that there are risks, that what they're telling you, that it's so safe, even though there's no testing or evidence to verify that. But these people that are coming out and telling you that they had these bad effects, or that a patient died right after taking the vaccine and nothing else could have caused that death other than the vaccine, what benefit do they get for letting the world know that? Because we know that back in 2020 and 2021, if you said anything negative about the vaccine or about wearing a mask or not being locked down, your life would basically be ruined. So what would be the benefit of them warning people about it? There's not a lot of benefit at all. Actually, there's a lot more risk for people uncovering those truths. But what would be the benefit of keeping that silent, not letting anybody know that people were having side effects from the vaccine? Okay, well, if nobody knows that it's risky, people are going to continue to get it. The media and Fauci and the Biden regime kept telling us that if you didn't take the vaccine, you were going to die. You were going to have a really bad winter, a really dark winter, or whatever he said. And we know from watching these hearings the last couple of weeks that Big Pharma funds mainstream media. Big Pharma, we know, funds our favorite and least favorite senators in Congress. And obviously, they have a lot to benefit from by telling you that the vaccines are safe and nothing's going to happen, and if you don't take them, you're going to die. So they have a vested interest in keeping people unaware that the vaccines were harmful. But none of these doctors that came forward had any motivation to come forward about it other than just trying to help and just point out the truth.
Untested supplements, fearmongers attacked the scientists and public health officials who had brought us out of one of the darkest hours in our nation's history, and people angered by measures taken to contained the virus claimed the threat that it posed was never real to begin with. So I guess my first question is, do you remember when you first learned that a vaccine against COVID-19 had become available, and how did you feel?
When I woke up, my first question was, who did I get sick? Because I assumed, everyone I had been near had gotten sick, and nobody had. But I remember laying in my hospital bed. I was kind of waking up and still going through delirium, and they had the TV on. And I was.
And a great point was brought up in the chat. A lot of our senators and our congressmen like to trade on the stock market. They really fight tooth and nail to continue trading on the stock market. And we know, people like Nancy Pelosi really loves trading on the stock market. It would be interesting to see how much of their portfolio is linked to Big Pharma. That's something that we can all take a look at in our spare time.
Watching the news, and it felt really surreal because people were getting vaccinated. Healthcare workers were starting to get vaccinated. And I just remember feeling like a little sense of relief that nobody else will, this will stop. Life will go back to what it was before, potentially. And my family, my parents and my sister were actually able to get vaccinated the day they picked me up from the hospital. By coincidence, there was availability, and they also felt just a sense of relief and hope.
And you look great, if I may say. I've seen some of the pictures of how you looked when you were in the hospital, and I wouldn't recognize you, which attests to, I think, the quality of care that you received at Johns Hopkins, and thanks to those docs and all the specialists and the nurses and all the heroes, not just there, but all around the country, who believe in vaccines, who believe in science.
Okay. I just don't really understand the point of this person. So, if you missed it yesterday, her story is she got COVID-19 before the vax had come out, and she had it really bad, and she was in the hospital for a few months, and she was on ventilators and oxygen and all this stuff, and luckily she did survive. She was very lucky. But she has no expertise on the vaccine, and like I said before, we don't know whether or not her taking the vaccine would have prevented her having those symptoms. We have no idea what would have happened. So she's not an expert on any of this. The only thing she could testify to is that she had COVID. So I don't really understand what point they're trying to prove by bringing her in. This is what the left loves to do. They love to just use these emotional stories to distract you from what's really going on. And just look at what he's saying and how he's saying it and the emotion that he's using. They love those tragic stories, and they're just using it to deflect from the truth because they're not saying anything that's true. They're just preying on your emotions.
How has the experience of battling for your life against COVID-19 affected how you feel about vaccines?
I don't think I thought about vaccines much before. We just had them. They kept us safe. They had eradicated several diseases. And then afterwards, it kind of was like, why didn't it happen sooner? Or why couldn't I have benefited from it? And for a long time, I thought, why me? Why did I get this sick? And then as I learned more about COVID and about all the data that came out of it, I said, well, why not me? I was 41. I was healthy. I didn't have pre-existing conditions. I was the reason that we needed a vaccine.
Well, I don't know the answer to your question, why me? But I do know that you are doing enormous good by being here today. And as painful as that experience was,
I'm so confused, guys. I really don't understand. How is she doing good? How has her story prove anything? It doesn't. It hasn't proved anything. There's literally no correlation between the story that she's telling and anything that's pertinent to this hearing. But the left really thinks that the American people are idiots. They think that they can just throw some drama, throw some emotion in, and we're just going to fall for that. And actually, you know, there is a good percentage of our population that does fall for it. They really don't use critical thinking. They fall into these traps. They fall for the propaganda. And these guys are professional gaslighters. They really are. I got to give it to the left. They have got gaslight maxing down to a science. They do it so good. They should literally win, like, I don't know, what is it, an Emmy? Is that TV? Like an Emmy for their performances. I mean, they're really good. They're really convincing. But that's all this is. This is pure political theater. And they haven't proven anything. Nothing. This person's testimony is completely irrelevant. Completely.
I think we owe you, all of us owe you a debt of gratitude for your bravery and your strength in coming here today and sharing your story. So I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Senator Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will echo the ranking member's comments. Thank you, Mrs. Young, for being here. I assume that's your mom. Friend, okay. I got in trouble. My wife's back there going, don't ever say stuff like that. But, well, I can see the pain is with you and your family, and I'm sure you're never going to forget what that was like, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your story. I think sometimes when we have this conversation about what happened during COVID, and I think the ranking member said, remember what it was like. And I do remember what it was like, and quite frankly, the government did a lot of good. I think certainly in your case, the vaccine helped you, but the government did tremendous things that were very, very bad. For example, in my home state of Ohio, we had a health director that recommended that we shut down schools. And those schools were shut down for 18 months. And we know now that under 18, you really didn't have much of an effect from COVID. There were 0 deaths in that category. And yet we destroyed the lives of those kids. I think we can trace back to that day the youth violence problem that we have today. We had people that were totally disconnected, including my youngest son, who spent his senior year in college taking classes remotely. And I can tell you, he didn't learn anything because there was no interaction with kids. And that's a college, somebody's senior year in college. You think about some of the important grades like 9th grade that are critical, 3rd grade that you need that socialization skill, 8th grade where you're going to graduate into high school. We just robbed those kids. And Dr. Wiseman, what are your thoughts just as a scientist? Don't you think that there should be some idea of building confidence in our healthcare system and that there needs to be a certain amount of humility that says, hey, maybe we don't know all the data, but you certainly are, you should be giving people the best data that you have. And yet it seemed like it was a very one-dimensional data set that said, this is the only thing we're going to tell you, this is the only thing you believe. And if you even questioned anything outside this data set or narrative, you're just a bad human being.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I actually want to echo Senator Blumenthal's comments that, you know, what was it like? I mean, it was chaos. And for the most part, everyone was trying to do a very, very difficult job and a very hard job. I think everyone would thank all the healthcare providers and the people in the government and so on. But there were specific failures, and you know, the testimony we heard was very compelling. And as someone who's been an advocate for patients with chronic conditions that are ignored and so on, I definitely empathize with the comments that we heard. But the thing that echoed with me a moment ago was that why me? And the why me that happened to me that answers your question, Senator, is that I hadn't thought about vaccines. I'd taken all the usual vaccines, so had my family. I had no history with doing any work with vaccines. And for a curious set of circumstances, I got involved in analyzing hydroxychloroquine data, which I wasn't very impressed with, frankly. But I found an error in one of the key studies that was used to close down hydroxychloroquine. And I argue with the authors, Bulwer, in Minnesota, to give me the data that was missing, that I discovered was missing. They gave me the data. And those data showed, when you plugged them in, that there was actually an effect of hydroxychloroquine. That was one of the 2 studies that closed down hydroxychloroquine. When I tried to get that published in the New England Journal of Medicine in January 2021, when thousands of people were dying, as Senator Blumenthal correctly described, okay, the response that I got from the New England Journal of Medicine was, well, we don't think this is going to be of very much interest to any one of our readers. And at that point, I said, there's a really big problem here. So
Because again, there was a narrative, and if you even questioned this narrative, you were somehow a bad human being.
I was
but let's remind also what happened. You had a scenario where we have a lot of people on the other side of the aisle that like to say President Trump's an authoritarian. President Trump hasn't threatened to fire employees for companies or military members who refuse to have sovereignty over their bodies. Under Biden, 9,000 members of the military were dismissed because they refused to put an experimental vaccine into their bodies. I mean, how did we get to that place, Dr. Weiser? How did we get to the place where I can decide for myself what I put into my own body? And if that means I want to take the vaccine, then good for you. But if I decide not to, I lose my ability to make a living, especially people who put on a uniform to defend this country. How is that possible?
Well, I mean, as a scientist, I'm also a pharmacist. You know, looking at what the law says, not as a lawyer, I let the lawyers figure out the legal aspects of it, but as a scientist, as a pharmacist, the EUA requirement required the Secretary of the HHS to make sure there are adequate systems to detect and monitor safety and to inform doctors and the patients who are receiving the vaccines of known and potential risks, so that they could make that sort of informed consent about what to put in their body. And according to the findings of Senator Johnson and his staff, they were effectively deprived of that because the safety systems that were designed and advertised as you know, detecting safety issues were not working. They were not working. The early warning system was turned off, and the problem still exists going forward for all vaccines. We want vaccine confidence. I agree with the lady over here. We want confidence in vaccines, but based on Dr. Sharfman's paper and other papers, going forward, there's a problem with using these systems unless they are corrected. So we have to have humility, Senator. You're absolutely right. We have to have the ability that people have all the right decisions, all the right information to make the decisions so they can do exactly what you've described.
And isn't it okay just to say, hey, look, this was a tough time. It's a tough history of the country. We had a lot of horrible situations going on, and we made mistakes, and just acknowledge that there's mistakes. In my mind, that makes it easier for us to respond to a future pandemic if the government has humility and transparency to say, we really, really screwed up. Dr. Jablanowski, you must have a good email address, probably the only one there. But briefly talk about what was the effect that somebody like Dr. Amy Acton in Ohio recommending schools to be closed, forcing children to be vaccinated, and by the way, bribing kids to get vaccinated by giving them money. So the state of Ohio is giving kids money and rewards if they got vaccinated. What's the long-term effects, you think, of a policy like that on children, which I know you care a lot about?
There are many long-term effects, certainly social and educational, but the one that sticks out to me the most is the lesson that we are teaching the next generation. Bodily autonomy, as you pointed out, it's our basic unit of liberty. I honestly, unfortunately, believe we live in a country that we could not have founded because we do not believe we have bodily autonomy. If we did, on September 9th, 2021, when Joe Biden, threatened us all with our patience is wearing thin, stated the obvious, that this is not about freedom or personal choice, declared the vaccines to be safe, and described a pandemic of the unvaccinated, he wouldn't have been in office in the next day. But he is. He was. And on your point of humility of the situation, I think that is the perfect word, because the then Secretary of HHS could have changed history with one word. He could have summoned the greatest army of statisticians and mathematicians and data scientists ever assembled under one topic with one word. That word was help. Please help. You know, we launched a pathetically tested vaccine onto the population, and our only reporting system was overbearing by the number of reports. We can't actually use the system. Please help. Or the expert at the FDA is working with the expert in the world, describing that our system isn't working, has a better system, but we don't like their answers. Please help. It would have saved a lot.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chairman.
Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Dr. Wiseman, if I could just start with you. It seems pretty clear to me, based on the testimony that we've heard today, based on the investigation that this committee has done and what we've learned over the last few years, that what we saw during COVID wasn't so much a public health campaign as it was a profit machine. A profit machine for the big pharma companies who made billions and billions of dollars off of a vaccine that they did not adequately test, about which they did not adequately disclose health risks. They made out like bandits, though. I mean, this is great for them. All of the public health problems get offloaded onto other people, namely the American people. All of the costs get borne by the patients. They don't have to do anything, and they get rich off of it. I mean, let me just ask you, in your professional opinion, did these companies like Pfizer and Moderna, did they adequately study and disclose any of the risks that were associated with these vaccines before they were forced upon the public?
Well, I think there was a lot of collaboration, and it was stated openly. The government, the FDA, the CDC were working very closely with the drug companies. So this wasn't a normal sort of development of drugs that we see in history. So a lot of the stuff that the companies were sort of got away with it, as it were, was with the consent of FDA, who generously interpreted regulations concerning certain types of testing, genotoxicity or lipid nanoparticle testing or biodistribution or whatever it is. And in one of the attachments in my testimony, there's 248 questions that detail that very specifically. So while the drug companies ultimately are responsible for their product, maybe they should have taken the view of, well, even if the government says we can get away with it, we're not going to. So there were clearly things that they knew, and they over generously interpreted cancer studies, genotoxicity studies, biodistribution studies. And in the particular case of Pfizer, there was the very egregious non-disclosure of a particular sequence in the plasmid that was used to manufacture the product of particular sequences that derive from an SV40 virus. It wasn't the whole virus, but there were particular sequences in that. But they specifically, in FOIA requests that we've had from different countries, Pfizer chose not to disclose those sequences. A very significant, I think, abuse of public trust, given that they had this sweetheart of a deal, all the marketing was done for them by the government. That is a particularly egregious example.
Let me just ask you if you've encountered other instances where adverse event data was downplayed or disregarded or even outright concealed by either the manufacturers or public health authorities in a way that had the effect of protecting corporate interests over patient safety.
You mean outside of COVID?
No, in the COVID context. I mean, you've named a couple. Are there others that we should be aware of?
I mean, I think everything, it's all to, the question is, even though we've been discussing the Bayesian data mining that the FDA conducted, we don't know what systems the Pfizer and Moderna were using. They also have a responsibility for pharmacovigilance. So I think a valid question is to ask, what were they finding? What systems were they using? Were they adequately an understanding of the limitations of those systems and to what extent were they reporting them to the government. So I can't give you more specific examples than what we've already seen.
What reforms would you recommend Congress pursue to ensure that this sort of future public health emergency, that in cases like this that we saw in COVID, that pharmaceutical companies, private companies are held accountable for adverse events? They're not getting the sweetheart deal that you've been describing.
Well, I think there has to be a greater separation between the government and the pharmaceutical companies, understanding that it was an emergency situation. There had to be an element of collaboration. So there is something there, but there has to be some separation. But going forward, specifically in the subject matter of what we're discussing today, there are some major reforms of VAERS that have to take place. In terms of making sure that data is properly collected. There's a person called Albert Benavides who's done a great job at documenting that. The companies should be required to be using the modified Bayesian methods. The PRR methods should also be used with caveats. And there has to be adequate oversight of exactly how these signals are going to be implemented or understood. The VSD, there was also, actually, to your earlier question, again, this was a VSD issue that they actually had seen signals for myocardial infarction and venous thromboembolism in May of 2022, but they didn't report them in the public domain until about a year later. So that was a concealment, but again, that was on the part of the VSD program, not specifically the manufacturers. So there's a whole slew of things that have to happen in terms of how we analyze data. The senator mentioned making sure that we actually get rates of adverse events that are based on actual usage, which we could have done in the earlier part of the COVID vaccine. We could have done that. And I did that analysis together with Dr. Getzko from the Hebrew University, and we normalized it the right way. We sent that to Dr. Evans, who was the father of the PRR method, that's equivalent to the Dr. Dumichel. And that moment when we sent that to him in England, he just closed down on us. So clearly there's got to be something within the government that says we've got to look at these things and take people seriously. And someone like Anna Schaafman and Dr. Dumichel, who are the father and mother of these methods, were being ignored. These weren't just any people. This was the father and the mother, as it were, of these methods. They need to be listened to and not marginalized, not being told to cease and desist. We don't want to know what you've got to say. I think that's terrible. And we need to understand what processes happened to make that situation possible.
You know, I think that the government working with private companies in the midst of a health crisis is one thing, collaboration is one thing, but systematically concealing from the public the true risks involved with this vaccine in a way that not only misled patients, that not only misled parents, that not only endangered the lives of children, but had the net effects of lining the pockets of the biggest pharma companies in the world, that is a disgrace. That is an absolute disgrace. And I just think, Mr. Chairman, that is what we have got to learn from this crisis. Somebody did profit off of it. You know, I mean, we talk about, COVID was good for nobody. Not quite true. It was very good for a handful of pharma companies who got the sweetheart deal with the government, who made billions of dollars off of it, and as usual, got to offload all of their potential liability onto somebody else and walk away from it. And now they are sitting pretty, and the patients are told, sorry, we lied to you, sorry, but at least the companies got rich. We've got to change this so this never happens again.
They have responsibility, a moral responsibility, in my opinion. Even whatever the government says, they have to go beyond the letter and say, okay, we think there's a problem here. We have to look at our product honestly and say, okay, we have to disclose all the risks, even though the FDA allows us to say certain things. Sorry.
Senator Hall, there's, I think it's an Oxfam study that shows trillions of dollars transfer to not just pharma, but the big box stores. It's all the little guys that got shut down. The big guys did phenomenally well. But I do want Dr. Jablonski to answer your question in terms of, because I think he missed his opening testimony. He listed all of this tests that they did not do in the approval process. Can you quick read that list again?
Certainly. It was There were, pre-EUA, there were no tests done on drug-drug interactions, cardiovascular toxicity, central nervous system toxicity, other organ toxicity, blood toxicity, genotoxicity, or carcinogenicity. And I then went on to say,
then they hit all kinds of things. And by the way, if you really want to know the abuse, talk to Bree Dressen, talk to Stephanie Manny DeGarry, who actually participated in the trials, AstraZeneca and Pfizer, and how they were completely abandoned. Manny DeGarry, I think at the time maybe 12 to 13-year-old little girl, she couldn't walk. She was in a wheelchair. She had to have a feeding tube. She could. In the report from Pfizer, they listed that as a stomach ache. Bree Dressen, who has amassed hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. AstraZeneca, I think, sent her a check for $1,300, something like that. And that settles it. So no, they were abandoned by the companies that they participated in the trials in, okay? And then they were abandoned by the officials of the FDA who treated them, acknowledged that they were vaccine injured, and then never told the public about it. And so we've got a real big problem in this country about vaccine injury deniers. Okay, again, these vaccine injuries are real, but it's being denied. And, Mr. Science himself, accused a lot of people of being science deniers. I'll accuse people of being vaccine injured deniers. And, the study, I've got to point this out. We're going to start this. Put up number 8. I have this chart for my November 21st, and Dr. Wiseman, you might have actually been at this public event with the vaccine injured. And the blue lines are the number of the new cases per day. And so you can see this is December 2020, right there. When the vaccine was approved and started being administered, you can see the number of cases pretty well peaked late 2020, early 2021, and started coming all the way down. The orange line is the uptake, the percentage of the Americans who were vaccinated with the COVID injection. Now, it was effective, if it really would have worked, you'd think that the number of cases would just tailed off. But that's not what happened. So at a previous hearing, put up number 4. Okay, well, if you just 2 seconds. At a previous hearing, you put up no, not that one. You put up a study from Commonwealth Fund saying that the vaccine saved 3.2 million lives. So I'm just going to, again, just my simple math, just prove how incredibly farcical that is. So if you just take a look
I don't know any simple math. It's all complex to me.
This is simple addition. So if you take a look at actual deaths up to the pandemic, 2019, about 2.8 million deaths. Now, if you just grow that, and of course, population is growing or aging, so it's growing compound annual growth rate a little under 1% a year. By about 2024, we'd have about 3.1 million deaths. We were projected about 2.9 for the pandemic year. Let's take a look at what actually happened. So the year pandemic, we went from 2.9 million deaths to 3.4. Obviously something was happening. People like Ms. Young suffered the result. 500,000 Americans died. Now, the vaccine came on board in 2021. You would think, again, if we pretty well, I hate to use the word culled the herd, but I mean the most vulnerable people died in 2020. So by 2021, the year of the vaccine, you would expect, if it was that effective, that number, if you would have been saving 3.2 million lives, by the way, just that's in 2021, 2022. You'd think that number would have come down. No, it went up to 3.5 million deaths. 2022 came down a little bit to 3.3. So let's put up the last one. Now, in order to make the claim that 3.2 million lives were saved in 21 and 2022, you would have had to assume that once the vaccine came on board, we were really expecting 5 million deaths in both 2021 and 2022. So that Commonwealth Fund is that study, that mathematical model, kind of like the Veyer's algorithm, it's complete bunk. It's complete BS. The vaccine did not save 3.2 million lives in America. What it did do is it had some serious adverse events to the tune of about 1.7 million, currently on Veyer's 39,000 worldwide, and we know it dramatically understates what that number was.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question? Ms. Young, you've sat through all this stuff. If you had to to do over again, would you have gotten the vaccine?
Oh, yeah, without question.
You would have gotten it.
Dude, this is a ridiculous question to ask her. She couldn't have gotten the vaccine before she got COVID because the vaccine wasn't even out when she got COVID. I don't even understand why this person is a witness. This is crazy. I do want to say something, though. In the chat, somebody said a comment, why are we still talking about this? You know, COVID was 6 years ago. We need to let this go. I disagree. I think we need to keep talking about it because this information, it's 2026, yeah, this is 6 years later. This information about how we were lied to, and if you think back, we were all literally tortured for over a year with the COVID lockdowns and the BS and the trust the science. We were tortured for years. We lost years of our lives. People lost their livelihood. People lost family, friends. I mean, the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, I know we would love to just stop talking about it and move on. And I know the left would love it if we just stopped talking about it because they don't want to take any accountability. And none of them are willing to admit that they were wrong. They were wrong about so much stuff. I would love to forget about it, but it is dangerous to forget because if we forget about this and we don't expose the truth, because the mainstream media, they're never going to report on this. But if we don't talk about it and try to set things right and bring attention to what really happened, it's going to happen again, but on a larger scale. And it's going to be a lot worse because they're going to try to correct the things that they got wrong to just make us like slaves or just depopulate the earth. Isn't that what some of our billionaires like to talk about, that we're just overpopulated here on earth? There's too many people. And that same billionaire that talks about how we have to depopulate earth just so happens to love to go to all these third world countries and bring in vaccines so he can protect the people, right? Come on, we're better than that. We need these hearings. We need to hear the truth. We need to remember. And us as individuals, we need to do whatever we can to spread the word to people that aren't watching these hearings, educate our children, our grandchildren. They need to know the truth. We need to use discernment. We can never have a situation like this again. Like, it was so horrible. COVID lockdowns were so horrible. Like, remember, guys, if you didn't want to wear a mask, you were shamed. People would call the police on their neighbors if they were outside or they had some people over. Like, that's what was going on in our country. People were told, if you don't get this experimental shot, you are fired. And our own president, President Biden, basically went on camera and told people that you're like the worst person alive if you didn't get this shot, and it's going to be a very dark winter for you because the unvaccinated people were killing all the vaccinated people. But the truth of the matter is, we did not know what this vaccine really could do. And there are a lot of people out there that have permanent damage or are dead, not from COVID, but from the vaccine. And our mainstream media will not report on that. And the left doesn't want to talk about it anymore. They don't care. They don't want to talk about it. They're never going to apologize. And they don't even show up for some of these hearings. The last hearing that we streamed, the whistleblower hearing, nobody from the Democratic Party came to that hearing. None. Not one person. 0 Democratic senators were in that hearing. So I'm sorry if somebody thinks that we should just let it go because it's been 6 years, but I'm not letting it go. I'm going to talk about this for the rest of my life, probably, until I feel like people get on board, because it's not right what happened. I never want to see something like this happen again.
even knowing that there were potential adverse effects and side effects, which frankly there are with any kind of medicine these days, you still would have gotten the vaccine.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I think about it. Anything we take, medicine, vitamins, like everything comes with a risk. It was a measured risk at the time. And yeah, I don't regret my decision at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, to Ms. Young, thank you for being here today.
Okay.
I apologize to the witnesses, and Mr. Chairman, I have a hearing of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Our world is many obligations at the same time, so I do apologize that I can't be here for the rest of the
I appreciate that. So in my letter to Secretary Kennedy of December 15th, point number 10, I point out a Rasmussen study. Again, this is a poll of all the American people that showed that 28% of the American public believe they personally knew somebody whose death may have been caused by the COVID injection. 28%. That same poll said that about 48% of Americans agree, quote, that there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. Again, doesn't prove causation, but this is what people experienced in the American public. This is what they saw. Now, Peter Marks and everybody else saying safe and effective, but what the public saw, and I saw this with people I knew, very serious side effects, including one person I think died. Now, a lot of people didn't want to admit it. Their loved ones who encouraged them to get that shot didn't want to admit that maybe that's what killed them. I never asked the question. I always had the suspicion with like 28% of the other American population. Dr. Jablonski, you talked about V-Safe. Talk a little bit about what it showed and what it didn't show. I mean, what it was trying to track. And again, the adverse events, as you said in your testimony, the things that nobody really cared that much about. It's the small stuff. It wasn't deaths, it wasn't myocarditis, but just talk a little bit about that.
Right. So the V-Safe system was designed to actually pick up subclinical findings, which in theory would be good. Because the VSD, what most of the health institutions rely on, are only what is presented clinically. However, in all honesty, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout was a freight train going 100 miles per hour, and nothing was going to stop it. Now, V-Safe was designed to ask 10 questions that nobody cared about, that was never going to stop this. If all 10 million people had checked all 10 boxes every time they were prompted, I still do not think it would have made a lick of difference.
But I also asked you to determine, did you seek medical care after your vaccination, correct?
That is correct.
And 7.7% of the people, of the 10 million people, sought medical care after their injection. Now, is that unusually high for any medication or any vaccine?
That seems awfully unusually high. The number of skipped work days, I believe,
25%.
Also unbelievably high.
Dr. Wiseman, one of the things that is not widely publicized is certainly the Pfizer, might have been true of the Moderna as well, but I know the Pfizer got the emergency use authorization based on a certain process, very low batch process number one. But that's not what the American people or the world got, is it? You want to describe the potential problems of them switching the process just regulatorily in terms of that's probably not what should happen.
Right.
But also the danger of that new process, particularly when we know that people like Kevin McKiernan are talking about massive amounts of DNA above and beyond the acceptable limits.
Okay, so in general, any time in any medical pharmaceutical product, if a manufacturer changes the manufacturing process, it triggers a very, very careful review of does this change the safety and efficacy of the product. Okay, that's a general principle that everyone knows. The material that was used by Pfizer, the so-called Process 1 material, The RNA was made in a certain way using a certain method. And only once the vaccine was authorized in December 2021, or just slightly before then, they introduced what would be the process 2, which was going to be using a bacteria with these things called plasmids. And it turns out there's also these SC40 sequences, but they were using the similar process that Moderna was using all the time. And there was supposed to be a comparator study done with 250 patients to show that the new material was acting the same way as the old material. That actually wasn't done, even though it was slated to be done. So that's a huge issue. And by switching the processes, it introduced different risks and different profiles into the product that haven't been properly studied. And FDA allowed Pfizer to slide and not even do that comparison study. There was actually a process 3. And the process 3 was about in end of 2021, where Pfizer changed the diluent, the liquid vehicle that the vaccine was carried in from one kind of solution to another kind of solution, which again wasn't properly characterized. And that was really called process 3. So what was in the clinical studies, even though there was lots of problems with the clinical studies as well, which that's a different problem, the public did not get the product that was the part of the clinical studies. In the case of Moderna, there were also some changes that happened to do with certain RNA sequences that were in the product. Again, there were questions that EMA, particularly the Europeans, were very careful in asking questions to Pfizer and Moderna about different aspects of their process. They asked good questions, and this is work that I did with Dr. Maria Gucci. They asked good questions. We went through those documents extensively. And then they got some kind of very perfunctory answer, and it seems like they were sort of told to, lie down and not do anything more. So on multiple occasions in both companies, there were lots of irregularities as to what the questions that were being asked about the manufacturing that weren't being properly answered.
Dr.
Okay, guys, let's unpack what he just said, because this was a lot. So, and maybe I'm interpreting it differently. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. But what I just heard him say was, it sounded like there was like a bait and switch with what was actually in these vaccines. That what was in the small amount of testing and studies that they did was not necessarily in all the vaccines that came after that. And it sounds like people from around the world were writing to Pfizer and Moderna and questioning this and asking them questions about what was really in this and what's going on. And they didn't really get a sufficient answer. They kind of danced around it and were just told to kind of go away. So that's really interesting. And I know that there's some people in this chat who have made the comment that the vaccine ingredients possibly changed from when Trump was in office to when Biden was in office. I don't know if that's true, but I wouldn't put it past them. If you guys have been watching the last couple weeks, we've done quite a few hearings on medications and generics and the FDA. And what we uncovered last week and the week before is that the majority of generic medications come from offshore. China, India, a lot from China. And what they make the pharmaceuticals with, it's called API. The majority of API comes from China. Well, the shocking thing that we uncovered is when those medications come from offshore and hit American soil, the FDA does not mandate that we test those before we dispense them to patients. The only requirement they have is that those labs follow our guidelines. But what we found was, we don't have like somebody from the US like overseeing those factories offshore. every now and then we'll go and we'll audit them in person, but we tell them like 12, 16 weeks before we're coming. So they have plenty of time to clean things up and, make it look pristine. So once they get the green light from the FDA, there's no further testing that's needed. So these generic medications that people are taking every day, there's no testing. We have no idea what's in those drugs when they come here. We're just relying on, the FDA green lighted them, last year or whatever, but there's no real oversight. We don't batch test. That's not required. Anything could be in those drugs. And furthermore, for generic drugs, it only has to have 100% of the active ingredient to be sold as a generic. But the inactive ingredient, it doesn't matter what's in it. And sometimes one pill could be 99% inactive ingredients. And we have no idea what's in it. We have no idea. So we know that this goes on. This goes on today. It's going on now. We have no idea what's in our generics. We have no idea what was in the COVID vaccine. No idea. None. Anything could have been in it. And what this guy was saying is it seems like what was in the vaccine when Trump, first launched Operation Warp Speed doesn't necessarily mean those same ingredients were in the vaccine after that. We have no idea. And doctors question that. Other countries question that. And they never got a real answer from Pfizer. They were told no, they were just given a whatever type of answer. So we don't know. You don't know what you took. You don't know what you took. And this is the thing that I want you guys to think about. And I know that this is really hard for some people. If you got the vaccine, you have to live with that decision the rest of your life. And a lot of people that got that vaccine, they don't want to admit that they were wrong. They don't want to admit that they were wrong. Maybe they're scared. I know some people that got the vaccine and they regretted it. And, they'll tell me, I wish I didn't get it. And some people will do detox or whatever protocols. I don't know. I don't know if it's ever out of your body. But there is a big population out there that got the vaccine and they're going to defend that vaccine for the rest of their lives because they just cannot admit that they were wrong, Okay, they have to live with that. That's fine. But it doesn't mean that you're right. This hearing is giving facts. And the only thing that the left wants to do is deny vaccine injuries and then tell you that you can't talk about those vaccine injuries because that makes people vaccine deniers. And we can't have people running around thinking that vaccines are bad for them because then Big Pharma, they won't get their vaccine money.
Blonsky, it kind of speaks to another problem you have is when you have no product liability. All the effort goes into getting a drug or a vaccine approved, but because you have no liability, once it's approved, there's not a whole lot of effort on anybody's part, right? The regulators who have approved it, they don't want to be proven wrong. The vaccine manufacturers, they're certainly not going to be, raising their hand and go, oh, by the way, we better pull this thing because we're seeing all kinds of problems. You've seen that with childhood vaccines as well. Do you want to just kind of describe that problem of, lack of liability for these products and what that produces from a standpoint of post-licensure behavior?
Yeah, I think that if there was no product liability for automobiles, we'd still be driving around in Model Ts. There is no development. There's no pressure to develop a better and safer. And in fact, there is a disincentive for them to look. It's actually a violation of the fiduciary duty to their shareholders if they actually look at their own product and find a problem. And so we are left powerless over this system that cannot be corrected by capitalistic forces if there is a liability shield. We just can't be.
So the vaccines got the emergency use authorization different times. They were licensed about August of 2021. Again, I was looking at VAERS early on. I remember a conversation I had with Francis Collins end of April when there were about 2,900 deaths reporting on VAERS. 46% of those, because we're administering to elderly, the frailer individuals. 46% of those deaths were occurring on the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. And I asked Dr. Collins about that. So, Senator, we've identified 6 cases where we've proved causation between the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and women of childbearing age. You said in terms of the other 2,900, Senator, people die. So I'll close out with that thought in terms of the incentives or the lack of incentives for the companies, the regulators who approve these things to rigorously follow them for safety problems.
So last week or the week before, we also learned that Big Pharma pays the majority of the salaries or the funding to the FDA. I think the statistics were 47% of taxpayer money goes to pay the FDA, and then the other 53% is actually paid by Big Pharma. But here's the kicker. 70% of pharmaceutical review is paid by Big Pharma, is funded by Big Pharma, okay? So the FDA gets 70% of its funding to review pharmaceuticals to make sure that they're safe and effective from these big pharmaceutical companies, okay, guys? So let's use some common sense if people in America actually still have it. Like, they have a vested interest to just approve and green light things because that's who's writing them a check. That's who's paying their bills. And unfortunately, this country, we've just gone a little bit wild on the greed and the corporate monopolies. And I guess we're just electing people. Well, no, because the FDA is not elected, but our Senate and our congressmen have the ability to make changes. But I think moving forward, what we need to do as citizens is we need to take a look at Congress and Senate's stock portfolio, see who's investing in big pharmaceutical companies. Also, you can go, I think it's, Open Secrets, or there's a few websites that will tell you, what corporations are donating to these politicians. So I think that that's, something that needs to be looked at before we cast our votes. Because nothing's going to change. It's just going to get worse. If Big Pharma is just funding everything, we already know that they're funding the legacy media. And that's not going to stop unless RFK gets his way and we get rid of pharmaceutical companies advertising on TV. We're one of the only countries in the world that allows it. And that's why we're in this position, guys. Like, there's no penalty for these guys. Like, sometimes they have to pay a fine or they have to pay a settlement. But, like, that is like pennies to them. It's like nothing. And we have to use discernment. And we have to get back to trusting our gut, listening to our intuition, doing the things that we know deep down is going to help us and keep us healthy, like getting sunlight, like eating real healthy foods, getting exercise. That's why I'm on here on my treadmill when I do these streams. But we have to take care of ourselves. And what's not productive is arguing back and forth about was the vaccine good or bad. Let's use common sense, guys. We do know the answer to it. Because again, what benefit does Senator Johnson get for uncovering this? What benefit? Seriously, guys, who's benefiting from him? We're benefiting. The American people are benefiting from his testimony and his research, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But all these other guys have a vested interest to just be on the side of Big Pharma. They don't care about us.
Because they don't want to admit they were wrong in approving them in the first place. They don't want to admit that shots or injections that they were doing videos on, telling everybody you have to get, that's why God gave you 2 arms, shot in a booster in each arm. I mean, nobody that pushed these things wants to admit they are wrong. The advice they gave might have resulted in somebody's death or permanent disability. That's what we're faced with. That's why we have this massive vaccine injury and injection injury denying going on in this country. And I can tell you from my standpoint, I'm not giving up. I'm not caving to the vaccine deniers. I'm not caving to the ridicule and vilification. I think my next hearing on this will probably bring in the injection injured. Now that we have this report, and again, look at the timing of this. Peter Marks was made aware of this in March of 2021, the same time the NIH was treating people and they were admitting these people were injured by the COVID injection. They were promised that they would be studied, that would be made public, their injuries would be made public. And here we are, end of April 2026, that hasn't happened. I'm on a mission to make sure that happens. So again, I want to thank all the witnesses. Again, Ms. Young, I appreciate the fact you're here. I really encourage you, if you allow me, I will put you in connection with the brand dress and their, you're going to be dealing with the same issues, okay? You haven't been seen, you haven't been heard, nor have they. I think it could really be a good conversation. Okay, wonderful, we'll do that. But the record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until 5 p.m. on Thursday, March 14th, 2026 for the submission of the statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.
Guys, hang in there with me. I have another hearing teed up. We are going to learn how our government is like screwing us over with Social Security. So give me 1 second to switch it out. This is going to be fun.
In the program. Fortunately, Social Security is going to get done if it doesn't happen in a bipartisan way, so I thank you for your cooperation. Social Security is a part of the social fabric of America. Unfortunately, its trust fund for retirement and survivors' benefits will be exhausted in 6 years. Come 2032, seniors see their benefits cut by as much as 22%. To ensure this cut never happens, the entire nation needs to have an honest discussion about Social Security. This will require a president, members of Congress, political candidates, and leaders of senior advocacy group organizations to come clean about the facts with the American people.
Let's take a bet. Are we going to learn tonight that Social Security is actually just a Ponzi scheme? Yes or no? Do you think they're going to admit that tonight? Let's find out.
ARP and other organizations need to stop running commercials saying, don't cut, and instead start running ads saying, Congress should act. Here's just a few Social Security facts. Social Security is facing a funding shortfall, largely due to demographics, because far fewer workers are paying into the Social Security relative to benefit recipients than at any time in the program's history. Secondly, the shortfall is large, very large. The present value of Social Security's unfunded obligations is a staggering $30 trillion. This fiscal hole cannot realistically be plugged simply through tax hikes on the wealthy. That's the Democrats' favorite solution, or by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, which is the Republicans' favorite solution. Inaction on Social Security is not an option. The only threat to current retirees' benefits is partisan fear-mongering that impedes bipartisan action. And I always say this facetiously, but I want to say there's some truth to it as far as I'm concerned. We get calls in the office almost daily. Don't cut Social Security. I'm not on the phone talking to these constituents, but I'd like to say to them, if you knew how scared members of Congress of both political parties are of the issue of Social Security, you'd be laughing at us instead of calling in and saying, don't cut Social Security. Now, they have the perfect right to do that, and we have to take those positions into consideration because people actually have that fear. During my first term in the United States Senate, Social Security was also facing a funding shortfall. Fortunately, several political leaders of the era rose to the occasion. This included two prominent people, one a Republican, one a Democrat, President Reagan and Democrat Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. There are no Ronald Reagans and Tip O'Neills in D.C. today. That's why nothing has happened yet. And maybe they're here, but they haven't popped up yet, except take a lead on this bill or that bill. But to really get it together, it takes top people to do it. Reagan-O'Neill action began with an agreement in 1981 to establish the bipartisan National Commission on Social Security Reform to break a logjam in Congress. Both leaders agreed to refrain from political attacks on the commission's work to provide space for bipartisan solution form. The commission's recommendation served as the basis for reform adopted with strong bipartisan support. I think in the United States Senate, there were less than 10 votes against this compromise. In turn, Social Security has made good on all promised benefits for the past 43 years. And I'll bet when Reagan and Tip O'Neill were done, they probably thought they were getting us through the next 20 years. You can see their foresight has gotten us at 43 years at this point and almost 50 years. It's now our turn, this generation of Congresses, to put partisan politics aside to save Social Security. In 1983, Republicans and Democrats will need to sit down, as in 1983, Republicans and Democrats will need to sit down together to consider a wide range of reform options. It's the only way that we'll find a solution that can clear 60 votes to pass the Senate. To foster productive bipartisan discussions, it would be helpful to agree on a set of common sense reform principles. And I don't presume that these are all of them, but these are principles as far as I'm concerned. First, no benefit reductions for current retirees or those near retirement. Second, reforms must prevent senior poverty as well or better than under current law. And third, reforms must be balanced. There is no path to 60 votes for a far-left proposals focused solely on tax hikes. Sooner we get to work, the better. Today's shortfall is more than twice as large as in 1983. The longer we wait to act, the worse the options become. So let's get to work now to save Social Security once and for all, or at least for 50 years like Reagan and Tiponidio do. So I thank you again, Senator Sanders, for this cooperation for this hearing, and I look forward to hearing from you and other members, and first our witnesses. So please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for calling this hearing on, I think, one of the most significant crises this country is facing. You're right, it is a crisis, and let's figure out how we can work together to resolve it. What I want to do is, for a moment, put the issue of Social Security into a broader context, if I might. And the broader context is, Mr. Chairman, we are living in a moment in history where in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we now have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had. Far surpasses the Gilded Age of Rockefeller and Carnegie and those guys. We are living in a moment when the people on top have never had it so good, while at the same time, some 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to put food on the table, pay their rent, pay for health care, other basic necessities of life. Everybody knows that. This is not some new discovery that I've made. I think that's a generally granted truth. In the midst of all of that, seniors are in particularly difficult trouble. And I think you mentioned that, Mr. Chairman. We are living at a time when, if you can believe it, over 20% of seniors in America are trying to survive on $15,000 a year. And Mr. Chairman, I don't think you could do that in Iowa, and I don't think you could do that in Vermont. Elderly people can't afford prescription drugs to heat their homes in the winter. Nursing home situation in America is a disaster, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, we have not paid enough attention to the plight of millions and millions of seniors in this country. And in the richest country on earth, we should do better than that. And on top of all of that, nearly half of older workers between the ages of 55 and 64 have no retirement savings. Zero retirement savings as they approach ending their work days.
So I feel a lot of different things about Social Security, and I'm sure you guys do as well. I remember, this was a long time ago, but my dad was talking about his taxes and how much he paid in Social Security tax. And at the time, I think his mom was like in her 70s. And he was just saying to me, like, I wish they didn't take this chunk of money, every year out of my check for Social Security. If I took that same amount of money and I put it in an investment, I would have like millions of dollars from that investment when I go to retire. Same thing for his mom. If he had, set aside that money that he was paying to Social Security in an investment fund for his mother, she would have had so much more money than what she was getting paid from Social Security. And that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest issues I have with Social Security. And I've said it a couple times, but it's like a Ponzi scheme. Because it's coming out of our paychecks and it's going to fund our seniors, but that's not how it was supposed to be designed. It should be, to my understanding, it was supposed to be designed like a retirement fund. You're taking that money out of the taxes and it goes into a fund and it grows. So when you go to retire, that money was set aside and it grew. But that's not how it works. It's literally a Ponzi scheme. It's literally like a pyramid scheme. That's what Social Security has become. And I do believe that we should continue funding it right now, because those people that are getting it, they worked all their life and paid Social Security and taxes so they could collect that money when they retire. They have a right to that money, in my opinion. But we need to figure out a way where this isn't like an infinite machine. We need to find a way. I mean, it should never have gotten to this point, but because it's a Ponzi scheme, we have to keep paying into it, or our seniors won't have anything, because they relied on the fact that their money was being deducted every week, every month, every year from their taxes, and that's their retirement. I think there was a lot more propaganda back in the day that, you know, they thought that, oh, I don't need to put any additional money aside because I'm getting Social Security. I'm getting that money when I retire. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what they were sold. That's what they were told. And they deserve to get that money. But we just need to call a spade a spade. Like, it's not run the way that it was supposed to be run. And when I go to retire, I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm not relying on Social Security. People don't even get that much. Some people are getting $800 a month, and that's all the money they have to live on. That's really scary in 2026. $800 does not go that far. And on the upper side of it, I think they just get a little bit over $3,000 a month. That's not a lot of money nowadays either in 2026. So absolutely, I don't think that we should get rid of this program right now for people that are on it. They paid into it. They deserve to get that money. But we need to figure out something else because it's not working and it's not doing what it was designed to do.
And the average Social Security benefit today is just $1,934 a month. Not a whole lot to live on. You are right in saying that Social Security Trust Fund is in danger and that we have got to move sooner than later. And I share that goal with you and look forward to doing that. But our goal as we do that must be to make sure that we strengthen Social Security, that we increase its solvency, hopefully to 75 years, and we do that in a way that is fair. And I do not believe that it is fair, as some have talked about, to cut Social Security benefits, to raise the retirement age. I honestly don't think that is the direction in which we...
Actually, raising the retirement age could be one solution. Actually is a good solution if they gave people like a sufficient amount of time to plan for that. So if they decided, today, okay, in 5 years, we're raising the retirement age to 67 or something like that. I think that would be fair.
You should be going. But I'll tell you what I do think, and I think there is more and more support for this. Mr. Chairman, you may have noticed there was an op-ed in the New York Times just a couple of days ago, written by a colleague of mine, somebody I work with a lot, Elizabeth Warren, but also signed by Bernie Moreno, a good Republican from Ohio, I'm sorry. And the idea that they talked about is the legislation that I have introduced. And it is not a complicated piece of legislation. And it's something I will fight to see become law. And that is, we are in a situation right now where if Catherine here makes $10 million a year and the chairman makes $186,000 a year, they both pay the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund. If Musk makes whatever he makes, hundreds of millions a year, he pays the same amount as somebody making $186,000 a year. $184,000, I'm sorry, that's the number right now. And that is, I think most people understand, that is a bit absurd. It means that if you make...
No, what is absurd is literally the Congress and the Senate create the laws. They created the tax laws. They created these laws that people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are following. And if you know anything about taxes, what you will find is that tax law, if you follow it a certain way and how it was written, how it was designed, is basically like a guide on how to pay as little taxes as possible. So if you have a really good tax attorney or tax preparer, CPA, and they know your business and they know the tax laws, they're going to have a conversation with you, a year before, and they're going to show you all the things that you need to do according to tax law to keep your tax bill as low as possible, and in some situations, zero. They're not doing anything wrong. They're literally following the laws that people like Bernie Sanders created. Or not necessarily created. He hasn't changed the laws at all. They're following the laws. And I mean, there's no reason to be salty about it. Change it. If he thinks it's unfair, he needs to figure out how to change it. He has the power and authority to do that, being a senator. How long has he been a senator? I'm not sure exactly, but I know he's been in office for a very long time. So this whole, rich people are bad narrative, it's not helping anybody. It's not. It doesn't do any good. And somebody like Elon Musk, I think, does a great service to this world, and he's created tons of jobs, and his companies and innovations have greatly helped America and the world. So to then criticize him for being successful and following the laws that people like Senator Sanders sign into law is really kind of absurd.
Make $184,500 a year, and that's the cap. You pay 6.2% of your income in Social Security taxes. But if you make 10 times more than that, let's just say you make $1.8 million, you pay 0.6% of your income in Social Security. So the wealthy people pay a fraction of what working people pay into the fund. I don't think that makes sense. Legislation that I have introduced applies the Social Security payroll tax on all income, including capital gains and dividends, for those who make over $250,000.
I think that we just need less taxes. I don't want to be taxed more. Do you guys want to be taxed more? We need less tax. We need to pay less tax so people can take the money that they worked hard for and they can invest it in what they want to invest it in, and their money can grow and they can do it on their own. We don't need the government to pay our retirement. They do a terrible job. This hearing is all about how people in this country are so scared that Social Security isn't going to exist, that they've paid in all of their working lives and it's going to get shut down because our government is so incompetent and does not know how to follow a system that they created and just mismanages our taxpayer money. I don't even know what the word would be, how bad of a job our government does with budgets and how wasteful they are. I don't know. Tell me in the chat, what word would you use to describe how poor of a job our government has done with managing the taxpayer money? I can't even think of a word to describe that, but this is just so silly. We need less taxes, guys. Please don't fall for this propaganda that we need to be paying more in. The more money that we pay, the worse things seem to get. And finally, over the last year, we've been uncovering all the blatant and egregious fraud within Medicare and Medicaid. And I just can't believe that the left always has that audacity to just ask for more money. They always think the solution is to just give them more money. But they waste it. The more money we give, the worse things get. And I think a perfect example of this is if you examine the homeless situation in LA and if you do a deep dive in that, because that is a city that gets a tremendous amount of money to help fix the homeless population. And the more money they get, the worse the homeless population and the situation gets. And that is really what's going on with our government.
Yeah. Under this bill, 91% of households would not see their taxes go up by 1 penny. The tax increase in our legislation only applies to the wealthiest 9% of Americans, those who make over $250,000 a year. In addition, under this legislation, we would increase COLAs, cost of living adjustment for seniors, by more accurately measuring their spending patterns through the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. That is what I believe we should be doing. So, Mr. Chairman, I do look forward to working with you, but I think the American people are catching on that the system, the economy today is not working for them. It's benefiting the very wealthy. And I think most Americans know that after you work your entire life, you should be able to retire with dignity and security. So my goal is to increase Social Security benefits, expand the solvency of Social Security, as I know you want to do, maybe 75 years, which would be great, but do it in a way that benefits working people and ask the wealthiest people in this country who have never had it so good to start paying.
So I have an idea, but of course, like, this is never going to happen. But we should stop paying into Social Security, okay, with notice. So we stop paying Social Security, but the government hires or creates a program where you have like skilled and ethical, financial advisors, and Americans can consult and put that money that they would have spent into Social Security into like a private retirement fund. Or maybe the government could create like a real actual retirement fund like they do for themselves. Well, no, I don't even know if the government actually has a legitimate one for themselves. That could be a Ponzi scheme too. But they create like a real investment retirement fund that people could put their money into instead of paying Social Security, and it works the way it's supposed to work, where it accrues interest, and when they go to retire, they have that money for them. That would be a really good idea. That would be one way that we could change things for the better. And, if somebody decided, okay, I don't want to use that money that I would have paid into Social Security for my retirement, I'm just going to spend all my money, that's on them. That's their choice. But I think a lot of Americans would like to be able to take that money that they already have to pay, they're forced to pay for Social Security, and pay it into an investment for themselves. And then when they go to retire, they get to decide what age they retire at, and they get to decide how much money they take out monthly or yearly or whatever. I think that would be a really good solution. What do you guys think?
Their fair share of taxes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I'll introduce the Well, I pushed the button, but the light didn't come on. Mr. Shai Kabas is Vice President Economic Policy for the Bipartisan Policy Center and leads the organization's work on a variety of economic issues, including fiscal policy, retirement, and financial security, and as well as tax policy. He got his start at the Policy Center in 2010, staffing the Domenici-Rivlin Debt Reduction Task Force. Miss Elizabeth Milito serves as Executive Director of the Small Business Legal Center of the National Federation of Independent Business. She handles legal and regulatory affairs for the NFIB and has testified before Congress and state legislatures on a broad range of legal and regulatory matters. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland Law School. And Miss Nancy Altman is President of Social Security Works and Chair of the Strengthened Social Security Coalition. She's currently serves as a member of the Social Security Advisory Board and has 50 years background in the area of Social Security, Medicare, private pensions, and related programs. And we'll go from the way I introduced this. So you go, Mr. Abakis, go ahead. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Sanders, for holding this hearing. Having spent the better part of 2 decades working on federal fiscal and retirement policy, I can say with confidence, Social Security's outlook is more dire than at any point in my professional life. For tens of millions of Americans, retirees, disabled workers, widows, and children who lost a parent, Social Security is the foundation of their financial lives. Protecting it is not an abstraction, it is an obligation. Let me highlight 5 points from my written testimony. Number 1, Social Security is heading for a fiscal cliff. According to the latest trustees report, Social Security's primary trust fund will be depleted in 2032. Unless Congress acts, every single beneficiary, current retirees included, will face an automatic 22% benefit cut. That reflects a program out of balance, only taking in about 3/4 of what it pays out. A 22% benefit cut means $10,600 less per year for a married couple of 2 average earners. It means $4,800 less per year for the average widow or widower. For millions of Americans, that is the difference between dignity and hardship. And the uncertainty alone is already costly. Tens of millions of workers cannot plan confidently for a retirement benefit that may not fully be there. Number 2, there is a hard truth that we need to be honest about. The significant majority of Social Security beneficiaries receive far more in lifetime benefits than they paid into the program in payroll taxes. That is not a criticism of beneficiaries. It is mathematically how the program has evolved. People are living longer than its architects anticipated, collecting benefits for more years than the contribution structure supports. Until we are willing to say that plainly, we cannot design honest solutions. Number 3, delay is making the problem worse and shifting the burden onto younger generations. A decade ago, the Bipartisan Policy Center's Retirement Commission showed that a balanced reform package of benefit and revenue changes could have achieved 75-year solvency and prevented trust fund depletion entirely. That window has closed. The same package today could no longer accomplish both. Every year Congress waits, the required changes grow larger, and the burden shifts further onto younger workers. Number 4, we will likely need a bridge, but it must be paired with real reform. We have passed the point at which benefit and revenue changes alone can prevent the 2032 depletion. The timeline is simply too short. Some form of bridging mechanism, temporary borrowing authority, or a limited general revenue transfer will likely be required. But it must carry strict guardrails and be paired with meaningful structural reform. Bridging without reforming is not a solution. It is a more expensive version of the current problem, financed at the expense of future taxpayers. Number 5, the solution must be bipartisan and it must be balanced. Senate rules require 60 votes. No party is likely to get there alone, and no party will absorb the full political cost of either tax increases or benefit adjustments in isolation. A durable solution requires both sides to share the risk, just like the 1983 reforms. Any solution must also protect the most vulnerable. Low-income workers, for whom Social Security is often their only meaningful source of retirement income, and surviving spouses who face sharp drops in income when a partner dies. I would also note that the U.S. senators elected this fall will, for the first time, be required to confront Social Security's insolvency during their term in office. That is a new political reality. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Social Security's history is one of problems deferred. The longer Congress waits, the more disruptive the eventual fix will be. We cannot afford to hide behind pledges of no changes or proposals that address only one side of the ledger. Both paths lead to the same place, a benefit cliff that nobody claims to want, but everyone is marching toward. When both parties decide the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of action, a deal gets made. The American people are at that point. Congress needs to catch up. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Malik.
Let me say this, though, because I'm not somebody that thinks that we should just cut everybody off and we should get rid of Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. I think that there are people out there that need those benefits and are very deserving of those benefits. And as American citizens, we do need to protect other citizens that need our help. But the problem is that there are many people that get into these benefit programs and stay there forever and learn how to work the system. And that's not what these benefits are for. Listen, if somebody becomes disabled, and they really cannot function and they need the help and they worked, or even if they didn't work, fine. I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, I think us as American citizens, we should help our people. But that's not what's going on. It really isn't, unfortunately. I've seen this firsthand. I've shared with you guys before, like my degree, my master's is in psychology. You know, years ago, I worked as a mental health clinician, and one of the places that I worked in, we worked with very low income people. I worked primarily with kids, and I would go to their schools, I would go to their homes, met with their families. And I saw firsthand like how the system gets worked. And this is happening. It's not a myth. I'm telling you, I have seen this firsthand, how people in this country work the system and get these benefits forever. And really probably shouldn't. So we need to start there. We do need to get rid of the fraud and the waste and the abuse and what we've seen over the last few months with Nick Shirley and the high quality Leering centers. That's just egregious fraud and abuse, and that needs to be addressed. Think of how much money was sent over to Somalia. I think it was above their normal GDP, 13 billion. I don't know, I may be making up that number, something along those lines. Isn't there something that we can do, get a task force out to Somalia or something and take that money back and put that money into an investment that'll fund Social Security? I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot of money out there that is wasted. And there's a lot of people that are working the system that shouldn't. And that money shouldn't be cut off. It should be used for legitimate citizens that have paid into these programs that deserve to get their benefits. But that's not happening.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Sanders, and members of the committee. On behalf of the National Federation of Independent Business, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's hearing on the future of Social Security. For more than 80 years, NFIB has advocated for America's small and independent business owners in Washington, D.C. and all 50 state capitals. NFIB is nonprofit, nonpartisan, and member-driven. Since our founding in 1943, NFIB has been exclusively dedicated to small and independent businesses and remains so today. Small businesses have a supersized impact on the U.S. economy, as you well know. Over 34 million small businesses operate across the country. From 1995 to 2023, they generated 20.2 million net new jobs, surpassing the 12.8 million created by large businesses. Small businesses employ 49% of the American workforce, account for 99.9% of all U.S. businesses, and comprise 45.9% of the GDP. It is no exaggeration to say that for the American economy to succeed, small businesses must succeed. Over the past 18 months, Congress and the administration have delivered tax certainty and regulatory relief to small businesses. Notably, Congress passed H.R. 1, making the 20% small business deduction permanent. Additionally, the administration exempted U.S. businesses from the beneficial ownership information reporting requirement, eliminating a major compliance burden and saving small businesses over $128 billion in regulatory costs. Despite these major victories, small businesses continue to face many economic headwinds. Taxes, inflation, and labor costs remain the top challenges for small business owners. Uncertainty is the enemy of growth and investment, and it is high. Or, as one member recently shared, economic uncertainty is the biggest challenge, while another wrote, taxes are too high. Business seems to be getting harder and harder to make a profit. The message from small businesses to Congress is simple: do no economic harm. That message is especially relevant to today's hearing. Proposals such as the Social Security Expansion Act are often framed as affecting only millionaires and billionaires, but small businesses are not out of harm's way from these deceptively labeled proposals. For instance, a design to lift the current payroll tax cap and extend Social Security taxes to certain investment income would directly impact many small business owners. Small businesses often report on the owner's individual tax return because 85% of small businesses are pass-through entities, such as S-corps, sole proprietorships, and partnerships. These businesses would be subject to additional Social Security taxes under the proposal. Profits exceeding $250,000, which are now often reinvested in payroll, equipment, and business expansion, would face a new 12.4% surtax, even if owners do not withdraw that income personally. For these businesses, proposals like the Social Security Expansion Act represent not just a tax increase on the wealthy, but on the revenue that small business owners depend on to operate, to grow, and to expand their businesses. When pass-through businesses face higher tax rates, it leads to less investment in their most valuable asset, their workforce. Small businesses continue to face economic challenges. Congress can help mitigate these challenges by extending beneficial small business tax provisions and rejecting a $33.8 trillion tax hike. Tax certainty will help businesses plan and increase small business confidence. It is my hope that Congress will pursue reforms that promote economic growth, encourage workforce participation, and protect small business owners' ability to invest in their business and to create new jobs. A stronger economy ultimately produces more payroll tax revenue and will improve Social Security's long-term outlook without imposing new burdens on Main Street employers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of small businesses.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Altman.
Social Security was enacted to provide basic economic security when wages are lost in the event of disability, death, or old age. Therefore, the first question we should ask is what level of benefits should Social Security provide? As I explain at length in my written statement, today's benefits are low by virtually any measure. Cutting those already inadequate benefits will deepen the nation's looming retirement income crisis. And cutting benefits will hurt the economy. On page 4 of my written statement, I list the dollar amount of Social Security benefits that flow into each of the subcommittee member states every month. By the same token, expanding Social Security's modest benefits will increase economic security and strengthen the economy. That leaves the question how the expanded benefits are financed and the shortfall eliminated. It's imperative to recognize that after Congress enacted the Social Security amendments of 1983, the subsequent trustees report projected that Social Security was funded for the full 75-year valuation period and beyond, which ran through 2058. But the actuaries didn't and really couldn't anticipate the huge income and wealth inequality that followed those amendments. Recent decades have seen a dramatic increase in the share of income going to those at the top. That inequality has cost Social Security more than $1.5 trillion since 1983. That is $1.5 trillion that should have gone to Social Security, but instead stayed in the pockets of the wealthiest among us. This year's trustees report has projected that Congress must act by 2032. That's 1 year sooner than last year's report projected. The earlier date is the result of Trump administration policies, specifically its first reconciliation bill, giving tax breaks to the wealthiest, and its hostility to immigrants, who every year contribute tens of billions more dollars to Social Security.
Okay, first of all, this is so misleading. It's not immigrants she's talking about, just illegals. And I wish that they wouldn't use those terms incorrectly. It's very misleading. But that's another topic, but we'll let her finish.
Then they draw out. Moreover, the administration's tariffs and its war against Iran will undoubtedly increase unemployment and inflation, harming Social Security even more. The 2032 date is best understood as an action-forcing event. The question isn't whether Congress will act. It's unimaginable that you don't, but rather what you do and whether you act transparently through regular order or through an undemocratic, closed-door, fast-tracked process. Two pieces of good news. First, there's no question we can afford an expanded Social Security, whose total cost at the end of the century is less than 7% of GDP. The issue is one of values, not affordability. The second piece of good news is that as polarized as the American people are, we are united about Social Security. Poll after poll reports that from MAGA Republicans to progressive Democrats, the American people overwhelmingly reject benefit cuts, even if paired with some revenue increases.
Yeah, no, I agree with this. Because if you're already paying, you've paid into the system since the first day you began working. Why would you agree to then have that cut? No, I paid that money in. I've been paying every paycheck that I get. I have to pay this Social Security. When I go to retire, I want that money that you told me that I was going to get. Nobody is going to vote against that. And I believe that you should get it. If you have paid in for your whole life, you deserve that money. You worked for that money. That's your money. You should be getting a lot more than they're giving us. But since Social Security has turned into a Ponzi scheme, unfortunately, we have to have this hearing. But it's so weird how our government operates. It just operates so poorly. And I don't know how to fix it. But I do know that giving the government more money and taking more money out of our pocket and paychecks and giving it to these people that just mismanage it so poorly, or maybe they're not mismanaging it poorly. Maybe they know what they're doing. I always wonder about that. Like, is this egregious fraud on purpose? Like, are they getting kickbacks or side deals? Like, what's going on? Is somebody really that stupid? No, they have to know what they're doing. They have to know what's going on, right? I don't know the answer.
And to be clear, raising the retirement age and means testing benefits are benefit cuts. Your constituents strongly and overwhelmingly prefer more revenue, ideally paid by the wealthiest. They also strongly support benefit increases. This is also the best policy. Fortunately, the Social Security Expansion Act is exactly what every poll shows the American people want. It should be brought into a vote immediately. What should not happen is the establishment of a commission whose recommendations are privileged and fast-tracked. That would be unprecedented and a deep disservice to the American people. Its only purpose would be to insulate and protect members of Congress from facing political accountability. Instead, all Social Security legislation should go through regular order, as it always has. Fortunately, when Congress does what the American people overwhelmingly want, and as the Social Security Expansion Act does, action can occur in the open and without delay. Thank you.
Thank you. The order will be Grassley, Sanders, Johnson, Wyden, Cassidy, Cortez, Mosto, and Tillerson Young. Listening to my colleagues about taxes on higher income people, even former President Obama's top economic advisor, Jason Furman, recognizes this is not the case. As Mr. Furman put it in a recent opinion piece for the New York Times, quote, applying the Social Security tax to all incomes would push the effective tax rate above 50%, end of quote. And this would, further quote, not leave a lot of room for further tax increases on the rich to close the budget deficit and fund other priorities. For you, Mr. Akabas, wouldn't my colleagues' preferred approach to Social Security ultimately lead to large tax hikes on middle class and severe cuts to other programs down the road?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And I want to start by giving credit to members on both sides who have put forward ideas. That's exactly what we need, given the situation we're in, and increasing revenue, including through changes to the taxable maximum, should certainly be on the table as part of a comprehensive solution. But the matter of the fact is that Jason Furman is correct, and we have limited availability to raise revenue in our economy. We need a lot of revenue for a lot of different purposes right now, not to mention various areas where we're underinvesting, closing the federal deficit that is large and growing, and allocating a huge amount of money towards the Social Security system just from high-income taxpayers, including to fund more benefits for high-income earners, is not, I think, the best use of those dollars. And so that's why PPC has consistently said that we think a balance that includes both additional revenue to the program and benefit adjustments are necessary. And then finally, the program's benefit structure has not been updated in more than 40 years. And I think a solution that only looks at the revenue side but doesn't focus on some of the changes in demographics and labor force dynamics that we've had would be a huge missed opportunity.
Okay. Ms. Melito, many of my colleagues appear to be under the impression that eliminating the tax cap would only fall on the back of so-called wealthy. Can you elaborate on how such proposals would impose punitive tax hikes on small business? And I know you referred to this in your opening statement. And secondly, how would such proposals affect the ability of small business to compete with large corporations?
Thank you, Senator Grassley, for that question. And I think punitive is a good characterization, since the Social Security Expansion Act would impose 3 new massive taxes, and a lot of those would fall on small businesses. And saying that most households won't see a tax increase with the elimination of the tax cap doesn't change the fact that the taxes would be imposed on many pass-through small businesses. And the concern isn't about, in my opinion, about the number of households that are affected. It's whether taxing those businesses that invest and create jobs is the right way to strengthen Social Security. I think this mantra, let's raise taxes on small businesses so that we can pay more, is not a winning slogan on Main Street. The outlook on Main Street right now is very different than the outlook on Wall Street. There is not an infusion of capital on Main Street right now. Small business owners use that income, which is referred to in the proposal as investment income, as savings and a way to expand their business, to hire new employees, and they put it away for a rainy day. So it would very much impact their ability to also compete with larger businesses.
And for you as well, some of my colleagues attempt to limit the reach of a small business tax hike by eliminating the tax cap only for taxpayers with earnings over $250,000. However, this threshold is not indexed. So won't this result in ever more small businesses getting hit by the tax hike?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly would, Senator. So if the threshold, the $250,000 threshold, is not indexed for inflation, its real value is going to decline over time. So what starts as a tax on a relatively small number of employees and small business owners could become a tax on many, many more taxpayers, savers, and small businesses in the future.
This will have to be my last question, so Mr. Akos. Wage subject to Social Security tax have been capped since the program's enactment in 1935, yet some of my colleagues argue it's fundamentally unfair. So for you, what is the purpose of the Social Security tax wage cap, and how would its elimination alter Social Security structure as an earned benefit based on contributions?
Thank you, Senator. The cap has been part of Social Security from the beginning because it connects what you pay in to what you receive out of the program. Social Security's 90-year political durability is in part resting on that principle, that it is an earned benefit and not a welfare program. And the more you contribute throughout your career, the more you receive in retirement. I think lifting the cap without changing the benefit formula would, of course, change that linkage. And that raises a fundamental question about what kind of program we want Social Security to be. Given where the program is, I think all options need to be on the table, but we should carefully consider any changes that truly break that linkage. Because
you know what else would really help? If we started teaching personal finance in school, like in elementary school, middle school, high school. Like, that was a class, like, kids learned like real life skills, like about investments, about the stock market, about saving, about running a business. Don't you guys think that that would be a good idea? That would help, so people wouldn't be in this situation when they go to retire. If they learn that as children, and then they can think about it before, you know, they start working. Some kids work as young as 14. I think I started working when I was 13. luckily for me, my dad's in the finance industry, so he helped teach me that, but I didn't learn anything like that in school. My kids don't learn that in school. I just have to teach them myself. But that would be like a really good idea, right? Don't you think that would be like more productive than kids like learning about like 8,600 different genders? That would be a good skill to have, like personal finance. That's just a thought. I think that could work better than just taxing us more and demotivating people from actually wanting to work. I mean, the reality is small business owners are the backbone and the heart of America. Being a small business owner is what makes America great. I've talked about this before, but I'm just a third generation American. My grandfather on my mom's side was the first person in his family to be born in America. His brothers were all born in Poland. And he got married young in his 20s, and he just owned different businesses. He owned a grocery store and eventually had a successful restaurant and catering business in Washington, D.C. But he worked for every penny that he had. He was an Air Force veteran. And, at that time, he was supporting his wife and his 4 kids, but also helping out his parents and my grandma's parents as well. And there's something just so special and so beautiful about being able to come to America and embracing the American way, learning English, speaking it fluently, and creating your own business. That's why so many people want to come to America. And if we just tax small business owners, tax people that are successful more and more and more, it just demotivates people. Nobody wants to fork over, we're proposing for some people like over 50% of their income. Who are you working for at that point? And then we listen to these hearings and we find out that money that's supposed to fund Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security is being abused by people that are immigrants, just abusing the system. And that's not motivating for anybody. And the solution to it is not to have more taxes. But that's always the left solution. Just, we need to pay more. We need to pay more taxes.
Because it changes the fundamental nature of the program. I would say that we at BPC have supported increasing the taxable maximum as part of a broader package, but that would still retain the link between earnings and benefits.
Okay, Senator Sanders.
Thanks. Before I ask my questions, let me just state for the record that the legislation that we are talking about, the bill that I've introduced, the Social Security Expansion Act, would not raise taxes except on those making more than $250,000, which would exclude the vast majority of small business owners from paying a penny in additional taxes. In reality, the vast majority of the additional tax would be paid for by wealthy business owners and investors who, in the last many years, have been able to avoid.
Okay, but they always say that. Biden said the same thing too. Oh, it's not going to affect you unless you make over $400,000. But that wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. They always say this, but it never is true. It always gets put, it feels like, on the middle class. And if you've been paying attention over the last, 5 years, it really feels like there's a very, I don't know what the word is, but it feels like the middle class has shrunk significantly. And where we're seeing middle class really being more towards like lower class, unfortunately. And that has a lot to do with paying more taxes, but truly because the cost of living has increased so significantly in this country over the last few years, like very, very noticeably. And I would say like the place that I see it the most is the grocery store. I can't believe how expensive groceries are today. And I'm like not a person that likes to complain about stuff like that. But it's become so egregious over the last few years. It's like very eye-opening. Like my number one bill is food. Food is so expensive in this country. Why? I don't think it needs to be. I think that is like a big issue that we should be addressing if we're going to talk about, our seniors and the lower class population. And, we're supposed to be funding them with Medicaid and, additional benefits through Social Security for our, seniors that are in poverty. The money that we're giving them, isn't going very far when groceries are so expensive. We could do something to address the problem by trying to get the cost of living to go down. But I don't think Congress wants to address that.
Billions in taxes. All right, let me begin by asking all of the panelists a very brief question, if I might. Do you agree with me and virtually every economist that we are seeing more income and wealth inequality in America today than at any time in the history of the country? Mr. Akabas, is that true?
Absolutely.
Yes, Senator, and the amount of earnings that are above the taxable maximum are now
Ms. Melito, very briefly, is that true?
growing.
My members tell a different story based on our most recent
They do
economic
not
trends.
believe that we are seeing now more income and wealth inequality than any time in America.
They are in a very uncomfortable period right now. Thank you.
That may be the case, but it doesn't deny the reality that we have more income and wealth inequality. Ms. Altman?
Unquestionably, the data.
Okay, Mr. Sanders, if you believe that, then why don't you do something about it? What about what I just talked about? Why are groceries so expensive? Why don't you go to Big Sugar and these big food corporations and do something so the cost of food goes down? Because it affects everybody. We all have to eat in this country. That would be a really good stepping stone, don't you think? But why is that shouldn't be our problem as the taxpayers. If you think that wealthy businesses should pay more, then why don't you go to those businesses and work with them? And it doesn't even necessarily need to be more taxes, because the problem is when we tax corporations more, guess who pays for that? We end up paying for it. Their tax bill goes up. They don't want to lower their profits, so they increase the pricing. So then it all comes back onto the citizens anyways. So this is it's just so crazy that this guy has been in the Senate and been in office for so long, and he does not understand. Well, I'm sure he does understand these principles, but these guys are professional gaslighters. It's all political theater. They don't actually want to solve any problems. All they want is more money. And when they get more money, they just spend it and create more problems. And these guys, they gotta go. How do we get rid of these people? Get them out of the Congress, get them out of the Senate. We need to revamp it all.
Absolutely
All right,
shows that.
my next question. The CEO of Warner Brothers, just as an example, just one, his name is David Zaslav, made $165 million in compensation. CEO of Blackstone made $126 million in compensation. We're seeing some of these guys are making huge amounts in compensation. Question to Mr. Akabas, and I'll go down to the whole panel. Do you think it is fair that somebody who makes $126 million in compensation pays the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund as somebody who makes $184,000? Is that fair?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think it's important to consider that Social Security is structured as an earned benefit program. And so while I certainly...
I know we can go on for hours. I'm just asking you, you're the average person here. Is that fair?
I agree we need to be collecting more revenue from higher income taxpayers as part of the solution to Social Security's.
Ms. Melito, do you think it's fair?
But it's not going to solve anything. Why can't they just solve the problems? Why can't they get to the root of the problem? These solutions are they're not solutions. These ideas are ridiculous. They're just going to make it worse. I wish that we had people in government that actually wanted to solve something. that actually could figure out how to get to the root of the problem, work with these big corporations, because at this point, we've created a lot of monopolies. We really have, and that's not what America was founded on, and that should not be the case. But expenses are so high now, and we have all of these just ridiculous laws and rules and regulation that almost makes it impossible to actually like become a business owner. We just need like an overhaul, but we need people in office that want to create solutions, not just enrich themselves. And that feels like that's what's been going on for a long time. And now it's really coming to the surface.
Social Security was set up as a contributory compact, so as it is now, that is the system we are working under.
Well, that
and I
is
think
the system.
It was also President Clinton, too, that also cautioned against
What President
raising
Clinton
taxes.
said is fine. That's not my view. I simply asked you whether it is fair. But the ordinary person thinks it's fair that somebody's making $100 million, pays the same amount into the trust fund as somebody's making $184,000. Do you think it's fair?
But see, what he's saying is not even accurate. And it's so misleading. And again, the average American does not understand the tax laws and the tax codes. And those should be things that are taught in school. I don't know why they aren't, but that should be something that kids learn in school. Kids nowadays learn very, very, I don't know what the word would be, ridiculous stuff in school. The curriculum is just very different than what it was, and it's not making anybody smarter. It's not teaching them life skills. When I went to school, we didn't have home economics, but when my mom went to school, she had home ec. Why don't we bring programs like that back? Like programs that teach kids things that they can actually use when they grow up.
The way Social Security is established now, yep.
Okay. Ms. Altman?
No, I don't. And in fact, it's even worse. Jeff Bezos, one of the wealthiest men in the world, only pays himself $80,000, so he pays less than someone making $184,500.
Okay.
I don't like when anybody insults Jeff Bezos.
Ms. Altman, some of my Republican colleagues in one form or another have talked about raising the retirement age, privatizing Social Security, cutting COLAs, and reducing Social Security benefits. What impact would that have on millions of seniors?
As you said in your opening statement, seniors are already, and people with disabilities are struggling to get by. They're deciding between food and medicine, and all of those changes that you named would make that struggle much harder, and it would hurt the economy. For every dollar of Social Security benefits that are paid, it generates $2 of economic activity, and the reverse is true if you cut those benefits.
Ms. Altman, I want you to say a word about a fact that I don't think is widely known, but it really is an American tragedy, and that is due to a lack of funding for the Social Security Administration, some 30,000 Americans with disabilities die every year waiting for the Social Security benefits they have earned. What should Congress do about this? Is the Trump administration considering making this problem even worse?
So I can answer that. In my opinion, what the administration needs to do is they need to be more aggressive in reducing fraud and waste. And they need to figure out a better way for people to easily but legitimately apply for these benefits, because the whole system is really nutty. And some people even have to hire an attorney to help them get the benefits because it's so difficult to navigate. And that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be easy, but it also shouldn't be super complex and difficult. If you have a disability and you're an American citizen, you should be able to collect that money in a timely manner. But the problem is that we have people that, like our professional scammers, know how to work the system, know exactly how to apply for things, maybe have, some inside help with that. And they are taking those benefits that legitimately disabled people should be entitled to. So that, in my opinion, is what the administration should be focusing on. It's not about cutting anything, just cutting the waste and fraud, not cutting the budget, but reallocating the waste and the abuse to individuals that actually need it.
Unfortunately, the Trump administration has already made it worse. It's forced out the most experienced workers and really decimated the agency. I think what Congress should do is immediately enact the Keep Billionaires Out of Social Security Act, which provides the money that pays for Social Security and the administration of it don't add a penny to the deficit. They all come out of dedicated revenue.
All right, Mr. Chairman, there is always a reason given why we should not ask the wealthiest people in this country who have enormous political power through their super PACs, et cetera, always a reason why they should not be asked to pay their fair share of taxes. But today, as I mentioned earlier, we are living in a rather strange moment in American history. Never before in American history have so few held so much wealth and so much power.
And I agree with him, and he's right. And if you follow the money and you look at what happened right around the COVID lockdowns and how many people enriched themselves during COVID and made significant amounts of money, like some of the big pharma execs, that did happen. People were really enriched over the last 5 years. So he's absolutely right. There is a disparity now, but I don't think that he has the solutions whatsoever. And I can tell you, he's not going to go to his, billionaire buddies and ask them to pay their fair share or whatever. It's just never going to happen. Like I said before, if we tax these businesses, they're just going to increase the price. That's just how it works. So his solutions are not solutions. It's complete political theater.
Meanwhile, while the people on top have never, ever had it so good, we are seeing senior citizens in Vermont and throughout this country literally struggling to pay for their prescription drugs, to put food on the table, heat their homes. In the richest country on earth, we can do better than that. And I think basically, bottom line here, is this Congress is going to have to summon up the courage to stand up to some enormously powerful people and their super PACs.
Well, I really hope that Senator Sanders takes the initiative and does that. That would be really great if he practiced what he preached, because I think there could be solutions going to these, super monopoly big businesses and working with them to help reduce costs for American citizens. I think that would really work. But I don't think we're actually going to see that from Senator Sanders. But I am signing off for the night. We will pick this back up tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight on Sunday. I got to go catch up with House of the Dragon. Have a great night.